Let's turn attention to other stories. NATO members have pledged their support for an irreversible path to future membership for Ukraine, as well as more aid. While a formal timeline for it to join the military alliance was not agreed at a summit in Washington, D.C., the military alliance's 32 members said they had unwavering support for Ukraine's war effort. There is more in this report.
NATO members have pledged their support for an irreversible path to future membership for Ukraine, as well as more aid. While a formal timeline for it to join the military alliance was not agreed at a summit in Washington, D.C., the military alliance's 32 members said they had unwavering support for Ukraine's war efforts. NATO also announced further integration with Ukraine's military, and members have committed 40 billion euros in aid in the next year, including F-16 fighter jets and air defense support. The bloc's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said, quote, "Support to Ukraine is not charity, it is in our own security interest," end of quote.
Today and tomorrow we will have the NATO summit with all the heads of state and government from all the allies. We'll also meet with the partners, and this will be an historic summit because we will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the most successful alliance in history. But we will do more than celebrations. We will also make important decisions for the future on deterrence and defense, on Ukraine, and on how to expand our partnerships, in particular with our partners in the Asia-Pacific.
UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and US President Joe Biden were among NATO leaders who reaffirmed the support for Ukraine at the summit. The ongoing invasion of Ukraine was top of the agenda at NATO's summit. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed U.S.-built F-16 jets are in the process of being transferred to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands. NATO members agreed to set up a new unit to coordinate military aid and training for the Ukrainian army as part of measures designed to deepen ties between the alliance and the Ukraine. The joint statement said these measures, combined with aid commitments from individual members, constitute a breach to Ukraine's membership in NATO. It also accused China of being a decisive enabler for Russia's war against Ukraine in some of its harshest remarks, yet on Beijing's involvement. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky was invited to the NATO summit and had meetings with world leaders, including his first with Sir Keir Starmer since he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Sir Keir told Mr. Zelensky that there would be no change in support for Ukraine's war effort, despite there being a new government in London. NATO leaders had hoped this week's summit would provide an opportunity to present a united front on Ukraine after modest Russian gains on the battlefield in the recent months.
And joining us to discuss this is an international affairs expert and global affairs analyst, Dr. Bola Didiron. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into this path for NATO, Ukraine's NATO membership, I wanted to ask you about the 75 years of NATO. This is going to be the last time Jens Stoltenberg will preside over a NATO summit as its Secretary General. Is also now seeing Sweden attend its very first summit. What do you make of all of this and 75 years of NATO?
Well, it is, as the Secretary General said, perhaps the most successful military alliance that has managed to not only stand against the Communist Pact, the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, and successfully defeated the Warsaw Pact, but it's outlived some of the major adversaries that the West has had. And it's also proven its usefulness and utility in the 21st century against Russia and against China. So in some ways, yes, it is successful, but others would beg to differ. Some sort of more critical analysts would say that it's been a force for destabilization across the world, and that we should not necessarily celebrate 75 years of an alliance that ought to have even probably ended after the Cold War ended in 1991. It should have been dissolved. This is the kind of argument some critical analysts would say. But overall, I would say congratulations to NATO members if they feel that it's an alliance that has provided security for them for the past 75 years. Congratulations to them. But others, as I said, would take a very more critical look and critical position on NATO.
And we're hearing now the alliance has called Ukraine's path to membership irreversible. Should this be seen as a clear resolve by NATO allies to ensure that Kyiv eventually joins the alliance?
I honestly think this is just sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's all bluster without any potential for real action in the immediate future. I note that it was a summit statement. There is nothing legally binding about this. We know, for instance, that NATO itself is in a flux at the moment, especially going by what is happening in the US. We know that Donald Trump in the past has threatened the disbandment of NATO, and has said that on the campaign trail over and over again in recent times, that he does not see the usefulness of NATO. So we know that even when NATO has all these fantastic plans, including the incorporation of Ukraine, that things such as the emergence of Donald Trump as the president of the United States can scupper such plans. But I also think that, yeah, please go on.
All right, so I want to, because just on the points you were making, I want to ask why, two questions. Ukraine's membership keeps running, or proposed membership keeps running into trouble. And then, you know, also considering the role that Turkey played in Finland's and Sweden's accession to NATO, what would a breach to membership look like for Ukraine?
Well, the first step is oftentimes to NATO membership is a membership action plan that signals the intention of the organization to begin the process of membership accession for the party in question. NATO has not offered Ukraine that, and as you have mentioned, I mean, it's not a norm. It's not an hard and fast rule, but there is a certain norm within NATO that states with ongoing border disputes or ongoing conflicts are oftentimes dissuaded from joining the group. So even though there is an aspiration here, I mean, according to the Secretary General member states, that Ukraine might in the future join NATO. I think it's really dependent on the state of the conflict within that region at the moment. If there is an ongoing conflict, and I doubt, in fact, I struggle to see the immediate, how that is going to translate into a NATO membership for Ukraine in the nearest future, because as long as there is a border conflict, the norm for NATO has always been to dissuade members from, with ongoing conflict from joining the military alliance.
And in his opening remarks there at the summit, President Biden, did make a statement, and he said, quote, that the war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country. Is that the sense that you get? And how do you think that Russia is reading all of this?
I think this is a bit surprising for me, because on the one hand, you have literally handed Russia one of the ammunitions and one of the arguments that it was using prior to the beginning of the war in 2022, which is that apart from denazification of the Ukrainian government and regime, that one of the real reasons why it was going to launch that war of aggression was to ensure that Ukraine never joins NATO. And now, once again, we've literally handed to Russia a formidable argument to say we can continue to fight this war because of our security interests, because there is a regional problem that is at our borders, which is Ukraine joining NATO. So I find it very curious that at this summit, the world at the same time had a couple of weeks ago had a peace summit, which China and other countries participating and
that summit was particularly even sponsored or proposed by Ukraine, because I spoke with a Ukrainer who said that was their idea, and I wanted to speak on that, but I have just a minute left, and I don't want to leave you to leave without talking about this, because I said earlier that this is the summit will last for the Alliance's long-serving Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The former Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, would move into his office in October. What should we expect?
I think it's going to be more of the same, to be honest. I don't think that the Secretary General really makes much difference in terms. It's a member state organization. A member state organization, unlike the EU, where the Secretariat can't really determine the direction of the organization. It's a member state organization